Hello and welcome to Absolutely Not. My name is Katrina K. Stroll. My pronouns are they, she, he, and you can learn more about me at katrinastroll.com. Excuse me. Real quick, if you appreciate the work that I do here or elsewhere, please visit the Support the Mission page of my website. There are several options to choose from to support my work, so please choose one. Whoa, what is going on? The key words of this episode are accurate representation, discrimination, and dismissive behavior. I encourage y'all to look up the definitions of these words and compare them to the definitions you carry with you on a daily basis. If you need help comparing, please let me know. This episode is sponsored by Headspace. Headspace has one mission: to improve the health and happiness of the world through meditation, sleep, stress, and mindfulness. Find out more about Headspace at the link in the show notes. Today's episode is titled Being Loud and Invisible. Felt. I'm excited to talk about this with our amazing special guest today, Michelle Skalland. She, her. Michelle is a versatile being. From her unconventional upbringing as a badass second-generation Latinx American scholar raised in the hood to her self-growth as a disabled bisexual mother living with an autoimmune disease, she surprises everyone, even herself, around with her continual newfound power. Michelle holds her Mexican and Honduran communities in her heart, honoring them by advocating loudly for anyone who might be othered in her organizations. Her excitement is contagious and her support is unwavering. She identifies as Honduran Mexican American, multiracial, second generation immigrant, cisgendered woman, disabled with Hashimoto's and PTSD, bisexual, agnostic, spiritual, middle class, a parent, a mother, a sibling, a sister, a spouse, a wife, daughter, friend, and left-handed. Michelle, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. Can I just say I love the bio, which kudos to my sisters for helping me with that. And towards the end, I was like, woof, that's a mouthful, like all the listen. And then I was like, yes, the left-handed part.
But those identities are needed. There's so many times when we're just not allowed to share our identities. And I think that's why I chose the keywords of actual and representation, very accurate representation is so important. Do you think accurate representation is important?
Oh, absolutely. Especially because oftentimes, at least for myself, when I carry certain identities and when people look at me, they immediately make assumptions about who I am without even asking me or having a conversation with me about that. And so for me, kind of to your point of why it is really important to have that for me, I am very vocal about my identities because it is important for people to know, who am I in this space, especially when I think about what identities I carry that make me feel othered, or what identities I carry that make me feel much more privileged. Um, so, and especially in an organization that I used to be at, where I was one of the few folks that identified as Latinx, it's definitely isolating amongst all the other identities that I've now identify with.
Mhm. And I appreciate you sharing that in this space. And you've mentioned several times now, even in you talking about your identities, that you are loud. How is it possible to be loud and invisible? I've never heard of that.
I know. It's interesting too, because I'm actually someone who considers myself to be more introverted, and people always get surprised by that. And so for me, being loud is definitely a learned skill. I get really bad anxiety. And one of the ways that my PTSD shows up is just that extreme anxiety, and at times wanting to be invisible. I don't want people to look at me. I don't want to be centered. I don't want people to acknowledge me. But then there's that other side where I mentioned identities that I carry, where people make assumptions, and I'm like, hold up. Actually, I struggle with my mental health, and it appears to you that I can handle stuff, and sometimes I can't. And so those are times over the years, especially after having my child, which by the way, after I had my child, I feel like that just opened me up in a way that I just was not expecting. Like I literally think my brain changed. I'm pretty sure my body changed. And I'm grateful for that opening because I do feel like I've come to have more healing. Um, but because of that, I've become so much more sensitive and so much more attuned to what I'm feeling at any time. And so in those moments where, oh my gosh, where was I going with this? This is what happens. Again, that's another thing with PTSD where like I'm saying something and then I'm like losing track and I'm like, wait, where was it? So going back to the piece about being loud and invisible. So like with my PTSD, there's times where I want to be invisible, layered on of people making assumptions about me when I carry those invisible identities. Um, but I've had to learn that if I want my boundaries respected or I want to support my communities, I have to speak up. And what I've learned in the spaces that I've been in at my previous job was um, that my voice was the power that I had. And I felt more safety in some ways. Like I actually felt more safety being vocal in a setting where there was a lot of people around because it's like, hey, these are witnesses. They are witnessing what I am saying and they are witnessing how you are responding to me. And so when I'm loud, literally loud, right, I'm using that as my platform. Like this is what I have control over, this is something I can do. And I always feel really uncomfortable about it because inside I'm like, please, I don't want you to look at me, but at the same time I'm like, no, you have to look at me. And even if it's not advocating for myself but for other folks, I do want to make sure that something is being said because I'm at a point where I can no longer just sit there and take it in, especially when I know that there's a possibility for more of an impact. So if I'm having like a one-on-one, there's definitely been times where I've let things go because it's like, not today. Everyone has to decide like what battles they want to, and I don't even want to use the word battles, but just what conversations they actually want to have that are going to be very activating, right? I'm someone who gets activated and I feel it all over my body when I get activated. Like I get really heated. And so I do decide to pick at times like when I want to have those conversations one on one. But I think in a setting when there's a lot more folks involved, I do feel that responsibility, especially because I do consider myself over the years to have become more privileged. And even with my light skin, I know there's a very big privilege in presenting as someone who is white, even though I don't identify as being that, but I recognize that's a huge privilege. And so in knowing that, it's just like, okay, when something's being said, I'm taking that responsibility. I don't know if anyone else is going to say anything, but I can't depend on anyone saying anything because then no one's going to say anything, right? You're just like, oh, well, someone's going to. And sometimes no one does. So I make sure that like if something truly bothers me because I start feeling it in my body, uh, then I'm like, okay, this is a sign I need to say something that just something's not right. And usually I'm that person that will like unmute myself and be like, excuse me, can I say something right here? Or even in the chat. And then in the chat, what I'll do if I want someone to respond, I'll be like, excuse me. I don't think I literally say excuse me, but I'll put in there, I'll be like, hey, is someone going to respond to my message here? Sometimes I just put something in the chat because I want others to see it, but I don't necessarily expect a response. When I do expect a response, I'm more likely to use my voice. And then chat, I think, can be a little bit more passive in that sense. Or emails. I do emails. So I was about to say that I try to use different forms in terms of being loud. Uh, and then in those moments where I'm having a really hard time, I shut down. And that's when I really try to be invisible. So I don't know if there's ever a time where I feel both loud and invisible. It's more of like or maybe it's more of like I respond by being loud, but inside I don't want to be, I want to be invisible.
Mm. I love that through all of these descriptions, you have given me more perception of like, or just acknowledging when we feel this, like I'm being loud right now and I feel that others want me to be invisible, or I am being loud right now and I feel like I need to be invisible. And you giving yourself the permission to make the decisions like, no, this is a good time, a good place. This is what we want to do. I can't feel this way anymore. So I choose to be loud now, or I choose to be invisible because I don't have the capacity. When was the
Mhm.
last time you were loud and someone asked you to be invisible?
Ooh, that's a good question. I'm trying to think at work. When was the last time I was loud and someone asked me to be invisible? So I think one of the things that comes up was in our department, we had a survey done and the results, and so the survey was around how folks felt about the department, whether they liked working there, whether they felt supported, questions around that of their overall well-being and engagement level. Um, and our organization, it's close to 50 folks, and I don't actually work there anymore. But I remember thinking, like, okay, when it comes time to the having the results come out and you're breaking it down with things such as race, gender, socioeconomic status, disability, a few other identities that I'm having blanking on right now. Um, my first thought was just like, what are they going to do for those folks that identify as Black, for those folks that identify as Latinx? We don't have any folks that I know of that identify as Indigenous in our department. So I was curious. I'm like, what are they going to do? Because they had said that if there was less than I think 3 people, they wouldn't display the results in trying to be respectful of folks' privacies because you would basically be able to identify, which side note, I don't think that's true because I'm the kind of person where it's just like everyone knows where I'm at. Okay. And so if everyone knows where I'm at and how I stand on things, there's no privacy. And I'm at a point where, and I told folks this, like, I don't care about privacy. When I do these surveys, I know my information is going to be out there and people are going to know where I'm at because I am one of the few that's so open. And so who is this actually for? Um, but anyway, so when the results came out, sure enough, they didn't do the breakdown specifically for those folks that identified as Black or for those that identify as Latinx because there weren't enough of us. And I remember asking the question in chat, asking, so what are you going to do with the results from folks that have that carry those identities when it's not here represented? I mean, it's represented when we think about like the overall group and maybe in other area, like other identities that we might carry that they might be represented. But we know that race and ethnicity, like that's a big deal in terms of, and especially in the science field where I was, we're so underrepresented, like we're just not there. So when our is our respect, like our perspective going to be seen, like actually evaluated and actually taken into consideration? And I remember asking that question, and I remember saying, like, for those of us who carry more than one marginalized identity, we're more at risk of being harmed. So what are you gonna do? And I remember one of the leaders, when they read the question in the chat and read my comment, their response was just to be like, oh, it seems like something that we can take offline. And I'm paraphrasing here, but they were just saying like, this is something that we can take offline. And I remember thinking like, what do you mean offline? No. Like in my mind, I'm like, I don't want to be having a private one-on-one conversation because that means that's where it's going to stay. It's not going to go anywhere else. And that's where I felt like that's what in my department often it's done. It's kind of shrugged off of like, oh, yeah, we're not going to talk about that another time. And it's just like, can you just acknowledge that you don't know what you're doing? I would appreciate that more if you just said, like, we have no idea. We don't know. I would appreciate that more than this comment of like, oh, let's take that offline. That's like a unique case. It's like, excuse what? What do you mean unique case? That's actually, to me, when I think about creating an environment where people do feel like they can thrive and they feel supported, you have to think about those who are more at risk of being harmed. So you can't just like take it offline. So that's probably the one of the examples that I can think of in the moment, but I've had that often. And for me, I even as simple of like, we don't know what the fuck we're doing would make me feel better. But the brushing off of like, oh, this is a unique case. Or like, you're the only one who seems to be bringing this up. It's like, no, no. Like, I can't be the only one. I talk, people talk. People talk amongst themselves in our department. And sure, when it comes to our racial identities, the majority are white in the department I was at. And then um, when it comes to those that aren't white, the majority are Asian. Uh, and yes, I would say that for those folks that maybe it's not something they always think about, but um, I also feel like there's other identities that they might carry that could put them at risk of being harmed as well. And it's not, and so I think a lot of folks, they don't, and that's something I try to remind myself too. It's just like, okay, I'm in this space. It's super privileged already. I mean, I knew that just from even being able to get into the science field, like, is a huge privilege. It's a huge privilege. Um, on top of all the other ways that people have been privileged to be able to gain access to that. Uh, but even among that, there's still this hierarchy. And so there's other ways that folks might have, especially like disability. That's one example. There are folks that I know I'm not the only one who identifies as disabled, and I know that there's reasons why some folks don't disclose that.
Mm.
I do it because I need to be vocal so that way people actually understand like what accommodations I need. And I do that knowing that that does put me at risk. Uh, but at the same time, I would rather folks know where I'm at, because it's like now then they can say like, listen, I told you, I explained what I needed. And so if they don't follow through, there's that documentation of like, I did what I could. And so it's also for me to feel better of like, okay, you did what you could, that you had control over. And if you still didn't get that support, at least now you know
Mm.
that these are not the folks that can give you that support. And that's another thing that I've learned over this, is that when you do speak up, um, there is that risk of, will that be used against me? And anytime I would speak up, I would be like, I'm ready for them to fire me. Fuck it, I'm ready. But I still have that fear, right? Be like, what does this mean if I were to? Fortunately, I ended up just quitting because I was like, nope, this is not for me anymore. Um, but anyways, I don't even know where we are going.
You're okay, you're okay. I love that you're giving people so many different instances that you can choose whether it be to be loud, and you're giving us a lot of warning signs and signals of what it looks like when people are trying to silence you or ask you to be more invisible. Because we don't get that during the interview process. People aren't willingly giving like, oh, we're going to try to silence you if you bring up these issues. So the people that are listening to this and thinking, you know what? I think tomorrow I'm going to go into work and start being loud. I think I've chosen invisibility a long time. I think I'm going to put that cloak down. What would be the top 3 tips you would share with them about choosing to be loud?
Mm. Well, so for me, one of the tips would be definitely find your community. And I know a lot of folks, I've heard a lot of people say that, and I don't know if it's just the timing. I've just been hearing so many people saying that, but it's so true. What has kept me going, and I had been in the organization for 7 years. For me, it's about finding the people that really support you. And sometimes that takes time to know who those people are. And it doesn't have to be people within your organization. It can be also family, friends that you've made along the way. But having that support and having those folks to be like, no, like what you're feeling is valid, what you're experiencing is valid, what you're sharing is important. Continue being yourself and authentic in that is really important. And I don't think I could be where I was if I didn't have those people. And I've had those people within my organization, but also outside of that. Um, I think also just being, because I am someone that shared that I'm more introverted, just sitting with the discomfort, because it's doing what's best for you and for others in your community isn't always going to feel good. For me, it's always hard. But I have to say, I don't know if there's been a time where I've regretted it. I mean, there's definitely been times where I'm just like, oh gosh, I don't want to remember what I said. Like, oh, especially that's where my PTSD comes in, because I'm like, I don't even remember what I said. But usually I've gotten, from the folks that I care about and for the folks that I'm thinking about in terms of supporting and advocating for, I have gotten responses back afterwards saying like them thanking me. And so I know like this is what's best for me to continue doing it. And so just sitting with that discomfort, like it's okay. I don't know if you're ever going to feel amazing afterwards. Sometimes you might. But I think it's okay to feel that discomfort. And I guess the third one around being loud is, it's also okay for folks not to agree with you. It's also okay for folks to, on the other side, right? So there's a side of those folks that are thanking you. There's also going to be those folks that are pissed off at you and don't like it. And so you just kind of have to accept like who I think about, like, do I really care about those people being mad at me? Like this, it's not for them. Like I wasn't speaking up for them. I was speaking up for those folks that don't feel like they are able to speak up and advocate for themselves, because I've also learned that advocating for yourself is a huge skill. I didn't learn, like, I didn't just like know how to do that. It took a lot of years to know what that looked like for me. Um, yeah, so those would be my 3 tips.
And they are amazing tips. I thank you so much, specifically for number 2. Nobody fucking told me that it's gonna hurt sometimes. It's gonna suck. People are gonna gaslight the shit out of you. And that might take you to a really dark place. And you truly need that community. And you truly need to understand that I didn't want those people's approval either way. Thank you so much for being honest in this space, because somebody needs to hear this, myself included, and I truly appreciate it. Are there any last minute sprinkles you'd like to share with the audience before we wrap it up today?
Um, I guess, if folks want to connect, always love chatting with people. I just have a LinkedIn. I don't really have social media. I think I have Instagram, but I just watch the Instagram reels that my sister will share with me. Yeah, but if you find me on LinkedIn, I'm always open to chatting. I'm exploring a career, so if folks want to connect and they know of something that I might be interested in, I'll chat with that, or about anything. I just love connecting with folks.
Thank you so much, Michelle. And to anyone listening, keep setting those boundaries and saying absolutely not to anything unaligned. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.